In our world today, being connected to the internet isn't just a nice to have, is it? It's a lifeline. It's how economies run, how we connect with each other, and how we access, well, pretty much all the knowledge in the world. But what happens when that lifeline just doesn't reach everyone? Well, in Uganda, that's a huge question, and the answer shows us a really stark digital divide. Let's dive into why that is. So, a recent headline from the Daily Monitor newspaper just lays it all out there. Even with this global digital revolution happening all around us, it asks this really blunt question. Why is Uganda offline? And we're not just talking about slow Wi-Fi here. We're talking about a massive chunk of the population being completely cut off. And this is what it all boils down to. Over 70% of Ugandans are still offline. Think about that for a second. More than two-thirds of the entire country can't take part in the digital world. So what's really going on behind this massive number? To really get our heads around this, we need to dig into what's being called Uganda's digital disconnect. These really deep gaps that separate the people who are online from those who are not. Now, if you just glance at this chart, you might think, hey, things are getting better. And sure, over the past couple of decades, internet access has gone from basically 0 to about 24%. But that growth has been incredibly slow. So slow that it's left a huge majority of people behind. And there's a name for this gap, right? It's the digital divide. It's basically the chasm between people who can easily get online and those who can't, whether it's because of where they live, how much money they make, or other roadblocks. In Uganda, this isn't just some academic term. It's a daily reality for millions. And wow, this slide really shows you just how wide that chasm is. Look at the difference between the city and the countryside. You've got 30% of people in urban areas online, but that number just plummets to a mere 9% in rural areas. That's not a gap, it's a digital canyon. So, let's talk about one of the biggest reasons for this divide. And it's something we can all understand: money. Even if you have a signal, getting online can be incredibly expensive. Let's break down the high cost of connection. It's a pretty simple question, right? But the answer tells us so much about the problem. What does it actually take, in real terms, to buy a basic data package in Uganda? Okay, so a weekly 5 GB data bundle, which, let's be honest, many of us could burn through in a day or two, costs somewhere between $10,000 and 15,000 Ugandan shillings. That's about $3 to $4 US. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but wait, context is everything here. This chart shows what people are actually spending on data for a whole month, and the difference is just staggering. Someone in a city might spend 20,000 shillings, but someone in a rural area spends only 7,000. So get this, a single weekly data package costs more than what an entire month's internet budget is for someone living in a rural area. And this quote just hits it home. Nearly half the population earns less than 200,000 shillings a month. That's around 54 US. When you're making that little, you have to prioritize. And that means food, school fees, and transport all come way before buying data. The internet isn't a utility. It's a luxury. Affordability is a massive, massive barrier. So, okay, cost is a huge issue. But before you can even worry about the price of data, you need the basic physical stuff to be there in the first place. And that's where we find another major problem: the system's missing links. I mean, before you can even think about the internet, you need a device, right? A phone. And right away, we see that same old split between urban and rural areas. While 70% of adults in cities have a mobile phone, less than half of adults in the countryside do. So the very first hurdle is just having a phone in your hand. And then beyond just having a phone, the core infrastructure itself has some major gaps. Fast 4G internet, that only reaches about 17% of the people who are even connected. And what about just keeping your phone charged? The electricity grid is incomplete, which is a huge challenge, especially outside of the cities. And of course, telecom companies tend to invest where it's most profitable, in urban centers, which leaves rural areas even further behind. So we've got the physical infrastructure problems, and we've got the high costs. But there's a third piece to this puzzle that's just as important, and that's the human element. We're talking about skills, confidence, and whether people even see the internet as relevant to their lives. Now this is fascinating. When you ask people who don't use the internet why they don't, you might expect the answer to be, it's too expensive. And that's on the list, for sure. But the number one reason from a whopping 63% of people is a lack of skills or confidence. This tells us so much. access is only half the battle. People also need to feel empowered to actually use the technology. And that leads right into this crucial point about relevance. This quote really highlights it. For some people, especially women in this study, the internet just doesn't feel like it was made for them. If there's no content that speaks to your life, your culture, your language, well, what's the big motivation to log on in the first place? And to make things even more complicated, government policies have sometimes thrown up more hurdles. There was a really controversial tax on using social media, and then later a tax on data itself. These kinds of policies send mixed messages and just make it even harder and more expensive for people to get online. Okay, so the challenges are pretty clear: infrastructure, cost, and these human factors. But the story doesn't have to end there. Researchers and policymakers have a pretty clear idea of how to start bridging this divide. So the path forward really has three main parts. First, you got to tackle the hardware. Expand the electricity grid and 4G networks out into those underserved rural areas. Second, you have to build demand. Launch awareness campaigns that show people the real, tangible benefits of being online. And third, and this is so important, you have to invest in people. That means nationwide digital literacy programs to give everyone the skills and confidence they need to thrive online. Which brings us to our final question. Uganda is really at a crossroads. On one hand, you have this huge digital divide. But on the other, there's this incredible potential for a digital dividend, where technology actually boosts the economy, creates jobs, and improves people's lives. The big unknown is whether the right mix of sustained investment and smart policy can finally turn that potential into a reality for all Ugandans.